नमस्ते पुनरपि स्वागतम्। अहम् आशां करोमि यत् पठनं सम्यक् चलति। गताभ्यासः दीर्घः आसीत्, किन्तु यदि भवन्तः मन्दं कुर्वन्ति तर्हि सविश्वासं तत्र भाषायां भवतः प्रवेशः सम्यक् एव भविष्यति इति मम पूर्णाश्वासनम् अस्ति. So I hope that you've been practicing with the table that you had in the previous lesson. And the assurance is that if you just go with it steadily, slowly, enjoy the experience, you're sure to improve your fluency with the Sambhashita Sanskritam or with spoken Sanskrit. So with these few words, let's move on to today's lesson. Today's lesson is from module 2. It's a revision again of nouns, the Subantaha and the verbs Tingantaha. And lecture 5 is going to be on the revision of feminine nouns, the Strilinga Subantaha and some verb forms of the Tingantaha. The concepts that will be covered are just like we had done in the previous lesson. So you would have the feminine noun forms, the Strilinga Subantaha with different endings in all cases, the Vibhaktayaha, in all the numbers of the Vachanani. And we'll again look at the table with all possible Strilinga Subantaha with different endings. And simultaneously we will be looking at the verb forms of the Tingantaha and the in Atmanepadi and the Parasmepadi. In basic tenses and moods, there's always a focus on building your vocabulary and much more this time, as you would have noticed. But I will not go into all of them in as much depth. I will just touch upon the main words and maybe just one or two examples so that you can then do it by yourself. We'll also look at have a conversation on the lesson we've done and look at the verse on Kshama, which is the first quality or the first value that is spoken of in the definition of dharma. Finally, we'll close with a quote from Ralph Emerson Waldo on forgiveness and his experience of the Bhagavad-gītā. So, the first table, Atra, the first case is that of the Prathama Vibhakti, the first case, the Kartrakarakam, and it is the Karta or the subject corresponding to the nominative case. Atra, we are already familiar with this, so I'll dive right into the practice. So we've got Ka, Mahila or Amba, Vardhate. Vardhate is to grow. I'll just introduce you to that particular verb in the Atmanepadi. So Vridh, it comes from Vridum, Vridhau, Bhuadi Ganaha. It's the first group and it means to increase. So Vardhate in the Vartamana Kala is Vardhate, Vardhete, Vardhante, Vardhase, Vardhete, Vardhadhve, Vardhe, Vardhavahe, Vardhamahe. It's also interesting that this looking at the verbs or being able to conjugate the verbs using that 3 by 3 grid is what actually structures the mind and makes it like that of engineers. I believe there's an alumnus from IIT Kharagpur, a very senior alumnus, Varadarajan Sheshamani ji, who was telling that engineers essentially think in terms of rows and columns. So I said then Sanskrit is one of the most perfect languages for engineers because everything is about rows and columns here, from the verbs to the noun declensions, etc. So coming back here, so we've got Ka, Mahila, Vardhate, or you can also have the word Amba that we've been looking at, and Amba is just like Mahila, except at the end for the Sambodhanam, you can have it as Hey Ambe, like a typical Akaranta Strilinga, or you also have the option of Hey Amba. This last part was not mentioned in the introduction to basic spoken Sanskrit, so I'm very glad that we have an opportunity to talk about it here again. Getting back. Ka Mahila Amba Vardhate. Uttaram. Sa or Esha Mahila Amba Vardhate. Next. Ke Mahile or Ambe Vardhete. Please do the Mahapranas here. Astu. Vardhete answer. Te or ete, mahile ambe, vardhete. Uttamam. Bahuvachane, kaha, mahilaha ambaha, vardhante. Uttaram. Etaha or taha, mahilaha ambaha, vardhante. Uttamam. What about if you make it in the Yushmad answers? So, ka, mahila, vardhate. And what we will do is we'll only do the answers here. So, tvam mahila, vardhase, subject has changed into the second person or the Madhyama Purusha. Yuvam ambe vardhethe. And finally, yuyam ambaha vardhadhve. So the vardhadhve. These really help to reinforce our pranic energy in the system. And then in the asmat or in the uttama purusha, so aham amba vardhe, I grow, I the mother grow, or I the woman grow. Avam mahile or ambe vardhavahe, and vayam mahilaha or ambaha vardhamahe. Astu spashtamasti. Just the bhavishya kala of vardhate will be vardhishyate, vardhishyate, vardhishyante, etc. Now let's look at the words themselves. So mahila amba, we've looked at that. You have other words like that. So asha, ashe, ashaha, and the rest is for you to practice. Now just one thing, the word jagadamba will act like amba, which means you will also have a he jagadamba as a possible sambodhanam. Moving on to mati. So we've tried to follow the same order of an development varnamala wise of the word order here. So mati becomes matihi, mati, mattayaha. Little different from the ikaranta that we are familiar with. So buddhi, buddhaya, buddhi and buddhayaha. Sumati, that's for you. Or sammitihi, not sumati here. It's sammitihi, means a committee. Okay. Next, bhavati, ikaranta. So bhavati, bhavatyau, bhavatyaha. You see the difference there. So bhavatyau, unlike ambe. So we had seen when we were learning the words that a becomes a, e becomes au, like the pullinga dvivachanam. So that was just a tip to remember. So bhavati, bhavatyau, bhavatyaha, shreni, shrenyaha, uttamam. Next time I give you the word, close your eyes and see if you're able to just say it aloud to yourselves. Astu. So, netre nimilya prayatnam karotu shabdam praptum. Now, stri or shri. Shri is the more common form. Stri also is a very similar one, but there are differences. So, stri kim bhavati, it stays stri, but shri becomes shrihi, visarga. Lakshmi, like Lakshmi. Lakshmihi, visarga sahitam bhavati tatra. So, striyau, like bhavatyau, and shriyau, and striyaha, shriyaha. So there aren't too many words like stri, but there are words like hri for shrihi. Astu, and dhihi, intelligence. That's why you have dhiyo yo naf prachodayat, dhiyaha, yaha naf prachodayat in the Gayatri mantra. So tat savituhu varenyam. So bhargo devasya dhimahi, dhiyo yo naf prachodayat. Creative aspect of the sun, we meditate upon you and illumine our minds. Iti. Very interestingly, it doesn't say illumine my mind, because it says illumine our minds. Only then will we all collectively progress. This underlying idea of a collective consciousness, we are all essentially that unitary consciousness, and that was is constantly reminded to us in any text that you take, not just in Sanskrit. Anything to do with the Indic civilization will invariably underline the importance of recognizing that oneness, the underlying oneness behind our diverse expressions. Astu tadbahu mukhyam asti. Now, coming back here. So we've got dhenu kim bhavati? Dhenuhu, dhenuhu, dhenu, dhenavaha, uttamam, tanu body. So tanu has short and tanu long as well, like you can see here. So the next ukara antasti, vadhu, bhu, and we see that they're not identical. So vadhu becomes vadhvau, but bhu doesn't become bhuvau, it becomes bhuvau, and vadhvaha, bhuvaha, and tanu and chamu, etc. So tanu, yes, so tanu is like vadhu. Astu. So tanvau and tanvaha. Astu. Next, swasra, rikaranta. So swasa, swasarau, swasaraha. Any bells that are ringing? Uttamam, like data. Pitriswasra, pitriswasa, pitriswasra, swasarau, and swasaraha. That is the sister. Swasra means sister here. Astu. But the word matra behaves like pitra, but in the feminine context. Ataha mata, matarau, mataraha. Duhitra, one is who milks the cow. Dohanam, from there it comes. Duh, from the root duh. And it is also said to be the source of the word, or the etymological root of the word doctor. So daughter comes from duhitra, meaning the daughter, of course. And yatra, one who is traveling. Sarit, sarit, saritau, saritaha. Yoshit, meaning a woman. Yoshit, yoshitau, yoshitaha. Tadit meaning a lightning, and you can do it. Seeman. Seeman is a nakaranta shabda, but it also has a form in the akaranta. This is a very tricky one. Astu? But just for us to know that when you're saying Seema, the word Seema can be a, it's not a akaranta only like we would tend to think. You also have the nakara form, and that's to be remembered. So, Seemanau or Seeme, and the last one is Seemanaha and Seemaha. Astu? What's the next one? Pathashala. So, we've looked at the first case. Now, let's go to the second case, which is the Dvitiya Vibhakti, second case, Karma Karakam, object to, and accusative. And we are already familiar with this, so let's dive into the exercise directly. Sa kutra or kam pathashalam yati. Sa etam pathashalam yati. Uttamam. Sa ke pathashale yati. Sa te pathashale yati. Uttamam. Next question, vadatu. Kaha pathashalaha yati. Uttamam. Sa taha pathashalaha or etaha pathashalaha yati. Uttamam. And this verb yati comes from ya prapane, to find yourself, to reach. Adadi ganaha. Astu. And let's look at the pronouns here. So, etam, ete, etaha, twam, twa, yuvam, vam, yushman, vaha, and mam, ma, avam, nau, asman, naha. Okay, let's look at the words themselves. Pathashala, pathashale, pathashala, bhojanashala. Close your eyes and try. Bhojanashalam, bhojanashale, bhojanashalaha. Uttamam. Mahila, hila, mahilam, mahile, mahilaha. Uttamam. Amba, bam. And then you've got devata. So what happens to devata? Devata, devata, devataha. Uttamam. Next, we've got bhavati becomes bhavatyau, bhavatihi, and anguli and yamini. Okay. So in the Dvitiya Vibhakti, what happens? Bahuvachanam Strilinga, there is a lengthening of the vowel, and there is a visarga that comes at the end of it. So as you can see, it is bhavati visarga tatra agachati. Okay. So mati, mati, matihi, uttamam. And you've got shanti, shantihi, uttamam. Stri becomes striyam. You see, or stream, rupa dvayam asti tatra. And same with shri. So striyam, striyau, striyaha. So stri, sorry, it's strihi. But shri doesn't behave in the same way, as you can see. So it's shriyam, shriyau, shriyaha. So I've kept it side by side so you can compare the different forms. Next, kimasti dhenu. Dhenum, dhenu, dhenuhu. Uttamam. Chanchu, chanchu, chanchuhu. Uttamam. And you've got the long also there. So you've got vadhu, vadhum. So it's a dirgha there. Vadhum, vadvau, vadhuhu. But it is bhuvam. Bhuvam, bhuvau, and bhuvaha. Tanu, chamu, and bhu have the bhru, the eyebrow. Next, swasaram. So swasra becomes swasaram, swasarau, swasrh. Matra swasra. So we looked at Pitra's sister, and now we're looking at the mother's sister. Matra swasra kim bhavati? Matra swasaram, swasarau, swasrh. Uttamam. Mataram, matarau, matrh. Uttamam. Nanandra. I'll let you do that. Saritam. Sarit becomes saritam, saritau, saritaha. Vidyut, vidyutau, vidyutaha. Seemanam or seemam. Seemanau or seeme. And the last one is seemanaha. There's a small error here. This should be seemanaha. Okay, because the prathama and the dvitiya vibhakti are the same in the strilinga words. So you have seemanaha and seemaha. So let's look at the verbs here. So you've got yati, yataha, yanti, yasi, yatha, yatha, yami, yavaha, yamaha, means I go, etc. Then you've got pashyati, the verb pashyati. So what is it? Drish or drishir, prekshane, bhuadi ganaha. The verb drish becomes pashyati. It's an interesting change there. So pashyati, pashyataha, pashyanti, pashyasi, pashyathaha, pashyatha, pashyami, pashyavaha, pashyamaha. And then we've got rit, which is yasya. Drashyati or Drakshati in the Bhavishya Kala. Let's do the Abhyasa. Uttarasya Anuvadam Kurvantu. Ke pratidinam kutra yataha. So these who two are going where, kutra yataha. And how do we know that? So because KK can also be bahuvachanam pullinga, but because it is yataha, we know that it is dvivachanam. It's a dual case and it's a third person dual case. Okay, that is what we know from there. So of these two things. So KK yataha, answer. It is these two mothers and sisters go to those parks every day. These two mothers. So ete matarau uttamam and sisters. You remember the difference? Swasarau uttamam. Cha and go to those parks. So gacchataha. To those parks. Parks vatika. So object kim bhavati? Uttamam. Vatike. Okay, vatike gacchataha. When? Pratidinam. Spashta? So, etau matarau swasarau cha gacchataha vatike pratidinam. And you can also put gacchataha at the end. Let's look at the next sentence, which is vakyasya bahuvachanam kritva yathochitam prashnam karotu. Tari atra kim bhavati? So we've got bhojanashalam and we'll do it the same way that we did last time. So this is the dvitiya vibhakti ekavachanam singular prapya avam. So this is the first person dual case, and then you've got the etam shikshikam sahodarim. This is the etam is the dvitiya vibhakti singular, dvitiya vibhakti singular, dvitiya vibhakti singular, and afvayavaha first person dual, and this is the present tense and this is the future of the same thing. Astu. So first is the bahuvachanam karotu. So what is it bahuvachanam? Bhojashalam kim bhavishyati? Bhojanasha laha. Bhojanashalaha prapya avam. Avam will become bahuvachane vayam uttamam. And because there is an a at the end, it will become vayam. Vayam etaha. You remember? Etaha shikshikaha sahodarihi. Lending of the vowel visarga. Cha afvayamaha and afvasyamaha. Astu. Spashtam asti. Now let's ask the question here. Tari atra prashne kim bhavati? Vakyasya bahuvachanam kritva yathochitam prashnam karotu. So avam. So we will call. So the question is, whom will you call? So bhojanashalaha prapya yuyam. Yuyam. Kaha kaha. Kaha kaha. Afvasya tha. Or afvayatha. I'll just take that out. Afvayatha. Okay. So yuyam afvayatha or afvasyatha. Afvayatha or afvasyatha. Now, yuyam can also be in the formal case. So you can have, instead of yuyam, you can have either bhavantaha or bhavatyaha. Kaha kaha afvayanti would have been in the singular one. Afvayanti. Okay. And in the future, afvasyanti. Atra bhavati. Astu. Spashtam asti. Tari kinchit abhyasam kurvantu swayam. And like I told you last time, the next abhyasa, pause, try to answer it on a piece of paper and then come back to the lesson to see if you've got it right. But before we move on, let's just make sure that the sentences are completely right. So we've got here, these two mothers and sisters, swasra, go to those parks every day. Ete matarau swasarau cha vatike pratidinam gacchataha. So there's a small change here. So here we use the word yataha and here it's gachataha. In terms of meaning, it doesn't make a difference, but just to keep the consistency, we can say yataha. Astu. I hope that's fine. And then just one more thing. In the second sentence where you've got bhojanashalam prapya avametam shikshikam sahodarim cha ahvayavaha and ahvasyavaha. When we are doing it in the bahuvachanam and asking the question in the bahuvachanam, it's a small detail, but a detail nonetheless. We've got bhojanshalaha prapya yuyam kaha kaha. Here we had a mahalanta because of the etaha, a vowel that was there. But here because we've got a consonant kaha, the yuyam will not get a mahalant but will become an anuswara. Astu. So with this, now that it's clear, let's move on to the next slide. Let's move on to the next table, which is with the third case, the Tritiya Vibhakti, the third case, the Karana Karakam, the instrument with, by, through, and it's the instrumental case. And here we are looking at the Anadyatana Bhutakala or the lung, and the verb that we have is vrid only. Avardhata, avardhetam, avardhanta, avardhathaha, avardhetham, avardhadhvam, avardhe, avardhavahi, and avardhamahi. And also the Kriyatipattil ring atra, avardhishyata. Uttamam. Now let's look at the table atra. Sa katham or kaya mahilaya avardhata. With which lady did she grow up? Answer. Sa taya mahilaya avardhata. Next. Sa kabhyam mahilabhyam avardhata. Sa tabhyam mahilabhyam avardhata. Last. Sa kabhihi mahilabhihi. Here. Avardhata. Answer. Sa tabhihi mahilabhihi avardhata. Spashtamasti. Now let's look at the nouns, the pronouns atra. So taya tabhyam tabhihi. Yushmat will be tvaya yuvabhyam yushmabhihi. And in the asmad will be maya avabhyam asmabhihi. Moving on to the table itself, we've got mahila becomes mahilaya, like kripa becomes kripaya, for please. That's the clue for you. Amba ambaya, bhavati bhavatya. Stri, it doesn't become striya, it becomes striya. Okay. Shriya. And all of them, so mahilabhyam, moving on, bhavatibhyam, stribhyam, shribhyam, and similarly mahilabhihi, etc. Okay, so that's for the bahuvachanam. And here you have a few words: angana, chinta, ramani, sakhi, dhi, intelligence again, bhihi, fear, and you can either use it with saha or vina, as we have seen earlier on. Okay, now let's move on with the next word, which is mati. And what do we see with mati? It is mati, matya. Similarly, dhenu becomes dhenva. So mati, because of the e, it turns into a ya. Because of the u, it turns into a va. So you must remember these groups of sounds, these families of sounds. So you've got matya, dhenva, vadva, bhuva. And matibhyam, dhenubhyam, vadhubhyam, and bhubhyam tatra. And similarly with bhihi, okay, bhubhihi, etc. But why have I indicated the u, bhu specially? Because you've got the short u there and it becomes bhubhihi there. Astu. Now practice it with murti. So try. Murti will become murtya, murtibhya, murtibhihi. Uttamam. And I'll let you practice the rest by yourself. Next one is swasra kim bhavati? Swasra or matra. Swasrabhyam, matrabhyam. The dvivachanam is the easiest. First two the same, the next three the same, and the last two the same. So swasrabhyam, matrabhyam, swasrabhi, matrabhihi, and pitraswasra, swasra, swasrabhyam, swasribhihi. Uttamam. And yatra, we've already looked at both these words earlier on. Sarit kim bhavati? Sarita, saridbhyam, saridbhihi. Yoshit, yoshita, yoshitbhyam, yoshitbhihi. Uttamam. Siman becomes simna, simaya, simabhyam, and simabhyam, depending on the origin that you're taking. Simabhi or simabhihi again. Astu. And daman is another word like that. But daman is only like siman. It doesn't have the sima format. Tatra. Okay. Now, moving on. Etat spashtam asti. Abhyasaha karaniya bhavati when you connect it with the verbs as well. Next, kimasi chaturthi vibhakti, fourth case. Sampradana karakam, receiver, for, purpose, give, to. And it is a dative case. Tatra kim bhavati? Kimartham? A general question. Kasyai kabhyam kabhyaha. So, sa kimartham or kasyai the adadat did she give? Okay. So, kimartham or kasyai adadat did she give? Sa tasyai mahilayai adadat. Two of them. Sa kabhyam adadat. Sa tabhyam mahilabhyam adadat. Uttamam. Kabhyah adadat. Tabhyah mahilabhyah adadat. Uttamam. And here we look at the words in the Yushmad first. So, tubhyam or te. Yuvabhyam adadat. Vam adadat. Yuvabhyam adadat. Vah adadat. Mahyam adadat. Me adadat. Bhiksham dehi me. That's the place where it's very popular. Avabhyam or now. Asmabhyam or naha. And what happens to the table itself? So, mahila yai, amba yai, bhavatyai, striyai, shriyai, shriye, bhyam and bhyaha. Astu. Chhaya kim bhavati? Chhaya yai, chhaya bhyam, chhaya bhyaha. Uttamam. And cheshta, then dhi, bhi. We've looked at all those words earlier on. Okay. So, moving on. Matyai. What happens to matyai? It is, you can have two forms there. It can either be matyai or it can be mataye. Just one thing in the previous thing, bhavatyai and vani and kaumudi are together. Dirgha ikaranta. Okay, that's the order has changed a little bit there. Now, matyai or mataye. Similarly, dhenvai or dhenave. Alternative forms that you find in literature also. Because you see, grammar was not first created and then people started speaking. People were using language and then grammar tried to systematize existing language. Ataha, there will always be these variations that one might find. Now, vadvai and bhuvai and bhuve asti. Bhyam and bhyaha like in the previous case. Shreni kim bhavishati? Shrenyai or shrenaye. Uttamam. Shreni bhyam, shreni bhyaha. Uttamam. Moving on. Swasre. Swasra becomes swasre. Matra, matre, swasra bhyam or matra bhyam, swasra bhyaha, matra bhyaha. What happens to duhitra? So it is duhitra bhyam and duhitre, duhitra bhyam and duhitra bhyaha. Uttamam. Astu. Sarite, sarit becomes sarite, sarid bhyam, sarid bhyaha. Vidyut, te vidyud bhyam, vidyud bhyaha. Uttamam. Siman becomes simne, sima, simayai, simabhyam, simabhyam, simabhyaha and simabhyaha. Papman is like siman. So, try it. Papne and then, no, so it is pamne, paman. Paman is a kind of a disease that you have. Okay, so paman becomes pamne. So, pamane, correct? And then pamabhyam and pamabhyaha. Uttamam. Astu. Let's look at the verbs ekavaram. Parasmay padyam. Apashyat, apashyatam, apashyan, apashyaha, apashyatam, apashyan, apashyata, apashyam, apashyava and apashyam. And adadat kim bhavati? Dadhatoho adadat adattam, adaduhu. Adadaha, adattam, adatta, adadam, adadva and adadma. Kriyatipatil ringe kim bhavati? Avadishyat and adrakshyat. Abhyasam kurma. Uttarasya anuvadam kritva bahuvachanam kurvantu. Sa katham kaya kaya saha sarvatra avrajata. So with whom all did she travel? Everywhere. So she went everywhere by boat. She went everywhere. First it's a singular. Tari atra singular asti. She went everywhere. Sa avrajata not avrajat, because it is an atmanepadi. So avrajata, everywhere. Sarvatra, by boat, nauka, so naukaya, along with this well-meaning sumati. So sumatya, gayika will become gayikaya. With this, so sumatya gayikaya saha, and daughter-in-law putravadhu. So putra vadva sahacha or cha saha avrajata. Astu, spashtam asti. Now let's move on to the next part of it, which is bahuvachanam kurvantu. So sa kim bhavishyati? Taha. And avrajata kim bhavati? So supposing in doubt, turn back and what happens? Avrajata. So avrajata, avrajanta. So it will become avrajanta. Sarvatra naukabhihi uttamam. With this well-meaning, I have forgotten it there. So it will be etaya. And let's do that in the bahuvachanam. Etabhihi. Let's do that again. Etabhihi. Sumatibhihi. Gayikabhihi. Saha putravadhubhihi. You can say cha, saha, sahacha, whichever order you want. Astu, these are two separate words there. Okay, cha saha avrajata. So taha avrajanta sarvatra naukabhihi etabhihi sumatibhihi gayikabhihi saha putravadhubhihi cha saha etc. Astu, idhanim अग्रिम भाग अस्ति वाक्यं पूरयित्वा द्विवचने करोतु. किमस्ति? वयं कस्यै बुद्धिमत् शब्द स्त्रीलिङ्गे किं भवति? बुद्धिमती. उत्तमं. तर्हि कस्यै बुद्धिमत्यै. उत्तमम्. बुद्धिमत्यै. धेनुम्. सो धेनुं वयं अदद्म. Astu. In case you are in doubt, you are not sure, go back. Adadma. You see, tatra asti, and then you can come back. Astu. Idanim purayitva dvivachane karotu. Vayam kim bhavati? Avam. Kasyai kim bhavati? Kabhyam. Buddhimatibhyam. So dhenu, dvivachane kim bhavati? Uttamam, dhenu. And then adadva. Okay, basically adadva. Astu? Spashtam asti? Uttamam. So let's move on. The Panchami Vibhakti, the fifth case, Yapadana Karakam, point of separation from, and it refers to the ablative case atra. So atra kim asti? Sa kutaha or kasyaha mahilayaha swikuryat. Should she take? Answer. Sa tasyaha mahilayaha swikuryat. You see, I have marked the yellow because you have the same for in the Strilinga. Panchami and Shashti have the same forms. Okay, at least for the Prathama Vibhakti, and that makes it easier if you know these connections. Mahilayaha swikuryat. Next, dvau, two of them, from which two? Ask the question. Uttamam. Sa kabhyam mahilabhyam swikuryat. Answer. Sa kabhyam mahilabhyam swikuryat. Uttamam. Question. Kabhyaha bahuvachane. Kabhyaha mahilabhyaha swikuryat. Tabhyaha mahilabhyaha swikuryat. Uttamam. Moving on, we have in the yushmat, it becomes tvat yuvabhyam yushmat. Alright. And if it's in the asmat, it becomes mat avabhyam and asmat. What happens to the words themselves? Let's see. So you've got mahilayaha ambayah, bhavatyah, striyah, shriyah or shriyah, bhyam and bhyah like we've seen earlier. Bharya. So bharya kim bhavati? Bharya meaning wife. Jaya also means wife. So bharya, bharyayah, bharyabhyam, bharyabhyah. Uttamam. And same jaya, gatra marjani, body scrubber, body cleaner. And some marjani, room cleaner. Marjanam means to clean. Astu dhi and bhi. Next, matyaha. Okay. So there it will be a matyaha or matehe. Similarly, matibhyam, matibhyah. Anguli, short and long exist. Angulyaha, angulehe. Angulibhyam, angulibhyah. Uttamam. Dhulihi, the dust, and murtihi, statue. Moving on, dhenu kim bhavati? Dhenvaha or dhenoho. Vadvaha or vadvaha. You see, it's not identical. And then bhuvaha or bhuvaha. So short becomes dhenoho as well. Long becomes vadvaha. So it's a bit different there. And all of them will get dhenubhyam or vadhubhyam, etc. Bhubhyam and bhyaha as well. Renu kim bhavati? Dust. So renu is like dhenu. So renvaha or renoho. Renvaha or dhenoho. So renoho. Okay. Next, renubhyam and renubhyaha. Uttamam. So even though one is very familiar with all of this, but every time you need to do it, you still need to think. Especially if it's not a word that's very, very common and that you're using frequently, one still needs to pause and make that calculation very quickly and make sure you've got all your sounds correct. Okay, so chinta mastu. Basically, I'm just trying to say that dosha yadi bhavanti chinta mastu abhyasena saha agachanti and yavat pathanti yavat tatra aswadayanti tatha anandah api bhavishyati. Astu atah chinta mastu. Next, kimasi? Seeman becomes seemnaha or seemayaha. Seemabhyam, seemabhyam, seemabhyah, seemabhyah. And daman? Damnaha, damabhyam, damabhyah. Uttamam. Sarit? Saritaha, saridbhyam, saridbhyah. Yoshit? Uttamam. Tadit? Uttamam. Swasra and matra? Swasuhu matuhu. So, matuhu pustakam swikuryat, etc. Swasra matrabhyam, swasra matrabhyah. Okay. Pitra swasra, same thing. Let's look at the last one here in the in this table, the Shashti Vibhakti, or the sixth case, the Sambandha, possession, relation of belong, the genitive. It doesn't have a karakam like we've already discussed earlier. So, kasya atra, kasya can be a general question where you don't know the gender. So, the general question will remain kasya, and the answer, if you're more specific, then you would ask kasyaha. Kasyaha mahilayaha kavitam pashyet, because we've got the verb pashyet. I'm trying to see how to fit it in. Which lady's kavita, poetry should she look at? Answer, tasyaha mahilayaha kavitam pashyet. Next, kayoho mahilayoho kavitam pashyet. So two people joint have written one poem. So tayoho mahilayoho kavitam pashyet. And then kasam mahilanam kavitam pashyet. So it's tasam mahilanam kavitam pashyet. All right. Moving on. Let's look at the nouns, pronouns in themselves. So tasyaha tayoho tasam tava te yuvayoho vam yushmakam vaha and mamma me avayoho now and asmakam naha. Kim bhavati atra? Mahilayaha ambayaha mahilayoho ambayoho mahilanam one naam. Next, bhavatyaha or striyaha shriyaha. So, what stays common, what changes? Please keep an eye out for that. And shriyaha also has shriyaha. All of them have bhavatyoho, so it will be striyoho and strinam. So, wherever there is a rakara, you have to be careful that the nakara will turn into a naam. Okay. In this case, all of them, so bhavati naam. So, bhavatyaha will become bhavati naam, striyaha will become strinam, and then shri will become shrinam also. Astu spashtam. Now, Hansi is a feminine swan, and you've got Rajni and Dhi. Matti, what happens? Matyaha, matehe, matyoho, matinam. Bhumi, bhumyaha or bhumehe, bhumyoho, bhuminam. Uttamam. Dhenvaha, dhennoho, vadvaha, vadvaha, bhuvaha, bhuvaha. Om bhur bhuvaha, swaha. And then, that's a different one though, that's a bahuvachanam in that sense. But here we've got dhenvoho and dhenunam. So vadvoho and vadhunam, bhuvoho and bhunam, etc. Next, Renu, you can find a word there. Shwashru is a dirgha asti. Yeah. Okay. Moving on, we've got Siman, so becomes Simnaha, Simnoho, Simnam, Sima becomes Simayaha, Simayoho and Simanam. Daman api tatha bhavati. Astu tried it out? Uttamam. Let's go on. Sarit kim bhavati? Saritaha, Saritoho, Saritam. So you can read along because it's all there. Astu. Vidyut, Vidyutoho, Vidyutaha, Vidyutoho and Vidyutam. Uttamam. Yoshit you can do. Swasra kim bhavati? So swasra and matra kim bhavati tatra? So swasuhu, matuhu and swasroho, matroho, swasrnam, dirgham and nam, matrnam. And you have the other one there, matra, swasra, etc. Let's look at the verbs that we've already practiced a little bit. Swikr, dukrin, karane, tanadi. So this dukrin karane is a famous reference to your Bhaja Govindam, where he says Bhaja Govindam, Govindam, Bhaja Mudamate. And then at the end he says Nahi Nahi Rakshati Dukrin Karani. So at a later age, if you're sitting and worrying about grammar, it will not save you. So that Dukrin Karane is by doing this Karoti, trying to memorize grammar. That is not what is going to save. Get the Saraha, the Rasa of it, and that is what will serve as the liberation. So Sanskritasya Vyakarane Vyakaranam Atyavashakam. Kintu Saram Rasamapi Anubhavantu iti Prarthana asti. Atai sukirat, svikuryatam, svikuryuhu, svikuryaha, svikuryatam, svikuryata, svikuryam, svikuryava, svikuryama. Pashyet kim bhavati? Pashyet, pashyetam, pashyeyuhu, pashyehe, pashyetam, pashyeta, pashyeyam, pashyeva and pashyema. Uttamam. Tari abhyasam kurma militva. Pause krutva purvam karotu, anantaram maya saha karotu. Astu. Tari किमस्ति अत्र प्रश्नोत्तरयोः संस्कृते अनुवादं लिखन्तु. Which women came from those mothers' lands? So which women? तर्हि अत्र बहुवचनमस्ति. तर्हि काः स्त्रियः came आगच्छन् from those mothers' lands. We'll keep those mothers together, from lands. So we can say that is Kshiti. Let's take the word Kshiti. You can say Prithvi, Kshiti, whatever. So Kshitibhyaha. And from those, sorry, Tasam. Matranam. Okay. So Ka Striha Agachan Tasam Matranam Kshitibhihi. Uttaram kimasti. These Lakshmis of ours two, came from those mothers' lands. So take the trouble just to do the the deciphering of it, the decoding of it. So these Lakshmis of ours, okay, of ours here, the two of them. So these Lakshmis. So this is in the Prathama Vibhakti Bahuvachanam plural. So Prathama Vibhakti plural. And of ours, so this is the first person sixth vibhakti of ours, came from those mothers' lands, So these two again we saw was sixth vibhakti, shashti vibhakti, and in the plural, and this goes together. So there's a fifth plural, and this is the fifth plural. Astu, tari kim bhavati these Lakshmis? Etaha. And then the answer is Lakshmi yaha. If in doubt, rewind. Atra rewind. Kim asti Lakshmi? Kim bhavati? Oh, you have to go all the way back to the beginning. Huh? So you have to go all the way back. Kim bhavati Lakshmi, 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 Lakshmiyaha. Okay, Shriyaha, so Shriyaha, so Lakshmiyaha. So you come back quickly. Atra kim bhavati? So Lakshmiyaha of ours. Avayoho. Kem, tari agachan. And the same thing. Tasam matranam kshetibhi. That's the same. Kshetibhyah. Astu, spashtamasti. Agre gachama. Now let's look at the final table atra, which is Saptami Vibhakti, 7th case, the Adhikarana Karakam, and it is Adhikarana Karakam, the location or prepositions in or on, and corresponding to the locative case in the English language. Now, we have the question which is Kada or Kutra. We've looked at Kada earlier on. Kutra, or more specifically Kasyam. Tarisa Kasyam Pathashalayam Vardheta. You remember it had the Vidhiling or the Bhavishyakala. So Vardheta, or you can have Vardhishyate. And the answer would be in the imperative. She should grow up in that particular school. So Sa Tasyam Pathashalayam Vardheta Vardhatam. Next, Sa Kayoho Pathashalayoho Vardheta. Answer, Sa Tayoho Pathashalayoho Vardhatam. And now, next, the question I want you to ask it in the future. Kim bhavishyati? Sa bhavish and bahuvachanam. Kasu pathashalasu vardhishyate. Answer, Sa tasu pathashalasu vardhetam. Vardhatam. Astu. So you see, even this a or it can make a difference. So one has to be extremely conscious. So sometimes you have to make sure that you're looking at the right thing also. Let's continue here. So you've got we've looked at the questions. Let's look at the pronouns. So tasyam tayoho tasu, twayi yuvayoho yushmasu, mai avayoho and asmasu. What happened to the words mahilayam ambayam, mahilayoho ambayoho, and mahilasu ambasu. Next, matyam or matau, matyoho and matishu. So this is a matishu. Astu. Jati kim bhavati? Jatyam jatau, jatyoho, jatishu. Uttamam. Next, bhavati. Dirgha ikarasya bhavatyam, striyam, shriyam or shriyi. Everything can take a yoho, so bhavatyoho. But striyoho and shriyoho. Bhavatishu, strishu. You can, I've just showed that you have to go back to the original form. So, strishu, shrishu. Okay, they will get back to the dirgha. That's what the T is indicating there. Tarani would be, yes, uttamam. Now, next, dhenvam. So, dhenu becomes dhenvam or dhenau. Dhenvoho, dhenushu, tanu. Tanvam, tanau. Tanvoho, tanushu. Uttamam. Vadhu becomes vadvam, or bhuvam, bhuhu becomes bhuvam or bhuvi. Vadvoho, vadhushu. Bhuvoho, bhushu. Uttamam. And you can do the same with shvashru and bhru. Uttamam. Moving on. Swasra becomes swasari, matari, swasroho, matroho, swasrishu, matrishu. And you can do the same with pitriswasar. That's a pitriswasar, not pitrishabda. Pitriswasar and duhitra. Try the same thing. Sarit kim bhavati? Sariti, saritoho, saritsu. Now the other thing is, as you're saying these words, it tends to become mechanical. But what I'd really like you to do is, as you're saying it, you can visualize what they mean. So visualize in one river, in two rivers, in many rivers. As you are saying these words, then you're adding multiple inputs to your brain, and that piece of information will stick better. Let's move on. We've got Seeman will become Seemni or Seemani. Seemayam, if it's an akaranta, then Seemnoho, Seemayoho, Seemsu or Seemasu. Same with Daman. Astu, tari vardhate iti dhatoho vayam ajnat rupam pashyama or lot rupam pashyama. Vardhatam, vardhetam, vardhantam, vardhaswa, vardhetam, vardhadvam. Tari Sanskrite yushmakam jnanam vardhatam. Let your Sanskrit knowledge grow. Then aham vardhe. And you can say that aham Sanskrite vardhe. So in Sanskrit I will grow. Through Sanskrit I will grow. So then vardhavahai and vardhamahai. Moving on to the final part, which is he. He mahile pashyatu. Two of them. He mahile samanam asti. He mahile pashyatam. He mahile pashyan. He mahilaha pashyantu. Uttamam. Gaikaha. Uttamam. Next, amba becomes amba, like I had mentioned initially, or ambe. Second one is he ambe. He ambaha. Similarly, you also have jagadamba and jagadambe. So dvayamapi asti. Then we have mati becomes he matte, mati, matayaha. Ratri, ratrayaha. Uttamam. Bhavati becomes bhavati. You like Saraswati becomes he Saraswati. And then stri, but stri, it is short, but shrihi, it remains shrihi. And then you've got bhavatyau, striyau and shriyau. Bhavatyaha, striyaha, shriyaha. Uttamam. You've got vapi, which means like a tank, water body. And then you've got dhenu becomes he dheno, he dhenu, he dhenavaha. And tanu, the same thing. Vadhu, vadhu has to have a long, vadhu, it is a long vowel, but it becomes he vadhu. Vadvau and vadvaha. Uttamam. Varshabhu, same thing. And Veerasu. Okay. Kintu bhu kim bhavati he bhuhu. It doesn't become short, although it's bhu and vadhu. So this is bhuhu, bhuvau, bhuvaha. Uttamam. Atra kim bhavati swasra kim he swasaha, swasarau, swasaraha. Pitra swasra, same thing, but mata kim bhavati he mataha, matarau, mataraha. Sarit, he sarit, he saritau, he saritaha. Seeman, seemanau and seemanaha. Astu. So is that clear? Now let's do the verbs here. So pashyatu, pashyatam, pashyantu, pashya, pashyatam, pashyata, pashyani. So sometimes they ask the question, what does this pashyani mean? So pashyani is almost as if you're encouraging yourself. So it can also mean may I see could be one meaning, or it's telling yourself see. It's when you're ordering yourself. This doesn't exist so much in the English language or in, the European language families. But here it is there. It's telling yourself, it's motivating yourself to do something. So, agacha, pashyava and pashyama. So, let's do the abhyasa. Sanskrit anuvadam kritva bahuvachane kurvantu. So, this is he shakti. Forceful one will be shakti. So, he Shakti. O goddess will be He Devi. O mother, He Amba or Ambe. Protect your child. Tari Shishum. Sorry. Shishum. Shishum is or tava balam, any of them. Rakshatu. Tava, you can say tava or bhavatyaha. Okay, rakshatu. What happens to the bahuvachanam? He shaktayaha. Devyaha. Ambaha. Yushmakam. Shishun. Rakshantu. Or Bhavatinam. Astu? Spashtam asti? So I hope this is clear now. So Shishu, I've written the Ukaranta, but you can choose many other words also there. Astu. Tarhi agre gachhama. Like we had seen in the Pullinga, I'll let you just see what are the possible word endings that are there for the Strilinga. You can pause there and have a look at it at your leisure. Moving on. This is also a more complicated representation of what we've looked at. Just interesting here is that you've got matti. So they're just mentioning here that all the words ending with ti are feminine generally. And also here the words are in the Pullinga. The blue ones are all the equivalent Pullinga words. Because they will say that up to a certain point it might be like a Strilinga and the rest is like the Pullinga. Or it might be entirely like the Pullinga also. Atah tad drashtavyam asti pustake tatha milati chet, because प्रत्येकस्य अत्र वक्तुम् अवकाशः न भवति, तत् अति एडवान्स्ड् कोर्स् मध्ये भविष्यति, but not now. Okay, let's move on. So we see that akara, tatra you have it sima, and the word up is a nitya bahuvachanantaha, so it's always in the bahuvachanam. And the word nisha also has an akara anta as a nish, and the word div has an equivalent in the Pullinga dyo, which is dyau, and which is also like the word go. So ruchiram asti, how there are similarities there. Atah patterns pathantu, learn the patterns, that really makes it much easier. Astu. So now we are going to do a conversation and practice the words that we've been looking at thus far. So I'd like you to find a partner and share the dialogues like I'll be doing with Piyush, so that you get more familiar with the application of the words. Astu. Tari. Namo namaha Piyusha. Tvam vishesha vartam ashrunoh uta or shrutavan kim?
Namaste Arye. Aham etavata kimapi na ashrunuvam. Kathayatu kim chalati?
Maya shrutam yat agami mase asmakam sansthayam vaishvika mahila sabha bhavishyati.
Tatra kaha agamishanti iti bhavati janati kim?
Shruyate yat bharatiya jnana paramparam adhikritya, Indian knowledge systems adhikritya, nana vidha vishaya jnaha nari shaktayah upasthitaha bhavishyanti iti. Kaschana shreshthah vaijnanikyah sumatayah sahityakartryah bahumanitaah kalakartryah anyah gunavatyah yoshitah matarah tasam swasarah punah tasam ye kepi dve pakanipune vadvau striyau api agamisyanti.
Uttamam bhavati taha melishyati kim?
Am aham taha vaijnanikihi sumatihi sahityakartrihi bahumanitaha kalakartrihi gunavatihi yoshitaha matrah tasam swasrah punarapi pakanipune vadvau striyau cha drashtum ichhami अथवा द्रष्टुकामा अस्मि.
भवती ताभिः श्रीमतीभिः नारी शक्तिभिः सह किमपि करिष्यति किम?
पश्याम चिन्तयामि यत् ताभिः वैज्ञानिकीभिः सुमतीभिः साहित्यकर्तृभिः कलाकर्तृभिः योषिद्भिः मातृभिः तासां स्वस्त्रिभिः पुनरपि पाकनिपुणाभ्यां वधूभ्यां स्त्रीभ्यां सह आपणं गमिष्यामि इति.
ताभ्यः सर्वाभ्यः किमपि दास्यति किम?
आम्, ताभ्यः वैज्ञानिकीभ्यः सुमतिभ्यः साहित्यकर्तृभ्यः कलाकर्तृभ्यः योषिद्भ्यः मातृभ्यः तासां स्वस्त्रिभ्यः पुनरपि पाकनिपुणाभ्यां वधूभ्यां स्त्रीभ्यां वङ्गदेशस्य मृण्मयमूर्तिः आभूषणानि च दास्यामि इति.
ताभ्यः वैज्ञानिकीभ्यः सुमतिभ्यः साहित्यकर्तृभ्यः कलाकर्तृभ्यः योषिद्भ्यः मातृभ्यः तासां स्वस्त्रिभ्यः पुनरपि पाकनिपुणाभ्यां वधूभ्यां स्त्रीभ्यां तासां संपर्कसूचनाः नेष्यति किम?
आम्, अवश्यं. तासां वैज्ञानिकीनां सुमतीनां साहित्यकर्तॄणां कलाकर्तॄणां योषितां मातॄणां तासां स्वस्त्रीणां पुनरपि पाकनिपुणयोः वधवोः स्त्रियोः च संपर्कसंकेतान् नेष्यामि एव.
समीचीनम् अहमपि आगन्तुं शक्नोमि किम् कारणं तासु वैज्ञानिकीषु समितिषु साहित्यकर्तृषु कलाकर्तृषु योषित्सु मातृषु तासां स्वश्रीषु पुनरपि पाकनिपुणयोः बन्धोः स्त्रियोः च विद्यमानैः गुणैः प्रेरितः भविष्यामि।
उचितः विचारः। अहं ताः प्रार्थयिष्ये। हे वैज्ञानिक्यः सुमतयः साहित्यकर्त्र्यः कलाकर्त्र्यः योषितः मातरः युष्माकं स्वसारः पुनरपि पाकनिपुणे वध्वौ स्त्रियौ च पुनरपि आगच्छन्तु इति।
सत्यं सुविचारः अयं। नमस्ते आर्ये।
अस्तु परश्वः सभासिद्धतायै मिलावः। In the section on the verses, I'd just like to repeat the general definition of dharma that we've looked at in our previous lesson, and then we'll focus on one of the values as in the given order that we have. So, atra asti kshama satyam damah shaucham danam indriya sanyamah ahimsa guru shushrusha tirthanusaranam daya arjavam lobha shunyatvam deva brahmana pujanam anabhyasuya cha tatha dharmah samanya uchyate iti. This is in the Vishnu Puranam and found in the Vachaspatyam. Astu, and you can see the translation over there. Now, what we've decided is to pick up on one quality and elaborate on them, because this idea of dharma is something that we need to understand in its application of having supported the values and practices of the civilization. Tari atra, I'd just like to quickly show you the scheme again of Satyam, Ritam and Brihat, which is the essence of the concept of dharma. I'll show it to you in the context of let's say, if you have a musical note which follows, let's say, this frequency. This is Satyam, this is the ideal note. If I can do it identically like that as it is given. So, this is Satyam. This application of it is Ritam. And the consequence will be an amplification. And that amplification is Brihat. Okay, so now the reason I'm showing you this, and when you have the Brihat, when you have Satyam, Ritam and Brihat combined, then you have Dharma. Because Dharma is that which upholds that best original tune. Astu. Now, why is it that in society we talk of adharma, and why are those values important? You see, what happens is that instead of being on this point A, because of ignorance, because of so many things, because of lack of understanding of the genuine truth, we tend to deviate. So instead of being on that note, we might be here at this point. Instead of being here, we are somewhere there. Instead of being here at that point, we might be somewhere here. Instead of being here, we are somewhere maybe there. So the note that we end up playing is something like, you know, a complete mismatch with the original tune. And so all these qualities are those that help an individual find that original optimum or the best within us, and therefore uphold the best possibility in everything. So Kshama is one of those important qualities. And what does Kshama do? It says Bahye chadhyatmike chaiva dukkhe chotpadite kvachit nakupyati navahanti sa Kshama parikirtita. Kimasti? Tari atra Kshama Bahye. So externally or cha adhyatmike, or even in the spiritual realm. Chaiva cha eva. So Bahye cha adhyatmike. Atra there is a sandhi. Cha eva sandhi asti. Dukkhe, in sorrow. Cha utpadite. So when there is a sorrow that has been created, kvachit, somewhere, na kupyati, doesn't get deranged, okay, doesn't get angry and therefore unstable. Navahanti, nor do they engage in actions of killing, like really violent thoughts. Sa Kshama parikirtita, that is Kshama. So Kshama, forgiveness, is not just telling somebody, oh, I forgive you, and then harbor a lot of negative emotions towards that person, including violent emotions of killing and all. Kshama is when really one remains unaffected by any kind of anger, irrespective of whatever sorrow has been caused to the individual from outer circumstances. Tari atra Kshama, or forgiveness, is a quality which is said to prevent a person from getting angry or wanting to kill that which causes any form of sorrow or external at external or spiritual levels. So here the external would be the materialistic world, and spiritual here would refer to any of those worlds that are subtle, cannot be grasped by our senses. Astu tari etadrisha sanyamaha, and the consequence of that is that if you have to go on the best route, even if there are external disturbances, it will allow you to continue doing what is shreyas, the best thing to be done, rather than getting carried away by circumstantial disturbances. Astu. And severe in this case. Astu. Tari ekavaram etat saswaram vaktum prayatnam kurma. Bahye chadhyatmike chaiva dukhe chotpadite kvachid na kupyati na vahanti sakshama parikirtita. So it's one thing to at least have a conceptual understanding of what that quality is supposed to mean. And secondly is when we are able to actually internalize it. And coming from a background of Indian psychology, I really invite you to try this out. So you take one of these values and you try and apply it, and keep a diary or keep something where you are observing what prevents you from doing it. These identifications of these trigger points are what really also Sanskritize our being. So Sanskritam is not just a language, but Sanskritization or cultivation of our entire being is what is meant by is what is indicated by the concept of dharma. And also the word kshamyatam. When you make a mistake and you annoy the other person and you say kshamyatam, these are the qualities that are expected from the person that you are asking forgiveness from. Astu, etaduktva, and let's look at a quotation from here. So here is a wonderful quote on forgiveness by Ralph Waldo Emerson, who was one of the earlier philosophical fathers or philosopher fathers of the US, and who laid the spiritual foundations in the US, the United States. So what he says on forgiveness is that for every minute you remain angry, you give up 60 seconds of peace of mind. And there is the second quotation of his experience with the Gita, which was shared to me by a dear American friend, Kent Bicknell, who's done a lot of work on trying to integrate their teachings in school education, etc. I've given his website also later on. But here he says that Emerson, expressing his gratitude to Thoreau in his journal of 1847 and sometimes 1848, said, "I owed my friend and I owed a magnificent day to the Bhagavad-gītā. It was the first of books. It was as if an empire spoke to me. Nothing small or unworthy, but large, serene, consistent, the voice of an old intelligence which another age and climate had pondered and thus disposed of the same questions which exercise us." So I've given you some references here, including the reference of this quote, which you can find in Rangaswamy S, where both Henry David Thoreau and is referred to as an American yogi, and he was inspired by Emerson. And Kent's website is also given there, Kent Bicknell, that you can see. So do have a look at this if you want to know more about how the Vedantic philosophy reached distant shores and transformed lives, and which have left their lasting influence on the way even modern Americans look at spirituality and look at life. So with these few words, thank you very much. Bahu dhanyavadaha. And Strilinga Shabdanam api abhyasam kurvantu. We'll meet again with the Napunsakalinga Shabdaha. Tari kripaya abhyasam krito. See what is common, what is different, and tena api kinchid ashwasanam bhavishyati. You'll feel reassured. Iti uktva namo namaha.